Welcome to the Blessors of Israel podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel. Today, once again, I'm so honored to have with me Jonathan Hessen. He is the CEO and host of TV7 Israel. He is also a senior fellow with the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. And it's such a great honor to have you with us today.
It's always a blessing to be with you, Matthew.
So, Jonathan, on Monday, President Trump met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, and they discussed issues related to Iran, trade, the Abraham Accords, but primarily it was really focused on Gaza and bringing peace to the Middle East. And I guess what I wanted to get from your perspective, because of your expertise in this area, I wanted to understand your thoughts in regards to the key takeaways from their bilateral meeting.
Well, one of the things that really struck me during the course of the UN General Assembly, which was a week long of state leaders from all over the world, be they heads of states of democracies or totalitarian regimes or Islamic republics or other type of state and non-state actors as well. Many non-state officials stream to those places for attempts to gain access. It was quite apparent that the United States has set its priorities in a very specific discourse, and that is when the United States looks at the world, it identifies its core objectives, its core priorities. It's becoming increasingly transactional, which obviously has its pros and cons to it. But all in all, it views strategic power competition as its most prevailing priority in challenging strategic power competition at a time when the Chinese are trying to diminish U.S. strengths, the U.S. alliances around the globe, and of course are posing a direct threat to Taiwan, where many critical components, including to the United States critical infrastructure and the United States military, are being produced on a regular basis. So the United States is looking at the world and it's telling itself, okay, we need to engage in a smart way. And the smart direction that President Trump has chosen to pursue already since the get-go of his current administration, his previous administration as well, but it wasn't as dominant as we are seeing right now. And that is a Kissingerian approach. As we remember, Henry Kissinger, the famous U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, bringing the United States to really its height of strategic capacity and dominance during a couple of decades ago. And right now we're seeing his strategies being implemented in this context from a global perspective. Now, when it comes to the Middle East, the United States looks at this region and it says we don't have the resources and we don't have the capacity to waste our time on the Middle East. We need to focus on the Pacific. We need to focus on our strategic challenge. And therefore, when we're looking right now at the Middle East, we want to get a situation where we get to broaden the Abraham Accords, and that is the strategy that is being applied in infusing prosperity into the regions through collaborative efforts under an architecture that the United States has established under the current president and his previous administration, and to see how we can basically subdue the Iranians and potentially even course correct the Ayatollah regime to a new type of discourse, irrespective of what they state in the public sphere. Naturally, as a totalitarian regime does, it says one thing to the people and to the world and does something completely different in accordance with its own national security interests and regime survival, basically, behind the scenes. So this is the discourse, and in light of the latest developments and the challenges that Israel faces in light of the Hamas instigated war against it. Back in 2023, when Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist organization in Gaza, launched the atrocities against the southern citizens of the state of Israel. Israel was forced to enter into a multi-front war. Now, God bless Israel, and that is something I hear amongst the highest ranks of the Trump administration. God bless Israel, because it altered the playing field in the Middle East to such a radical degree that it has created new opportunities for the United States to reconstruct the strategic composition of this region. However, the situation is still very fluid, and President Trump is very keen on engaging the region in a very forceful manner. The failures to reach a certain accommodation in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict to the north in Europe has also upped the pressure to try and resolve the Middle East, and hopefully also by doing so have a certain positive effect to the Russian calculus. In the broader term, we had just last week the snapback, which during Saturday we saw the UN basically reimposing a host of resolutions between 2006 and 2010 were imposed against the Islamic Republic, which right now under international law Iran is not allowed to enrich any uranium which it sought to accumulate to nuclear weapon grade material. Right, so there are a lot of different shifts that have been occurring over the course of the last several days. And one thing that President Trump has been hearing during his meetings with Arab leaders, also on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last week, was time and again, we need to end the war in Gaza and we need to force a peace upon Israel and the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, in what they call the West Bank, we call Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley, and to bring about a new composition that would then establish the foundation to enhancing or broadening the architecture of the Abraham Accords, which is a security alliance, a prosperity alliance, again, constructed by the United States of America. And by doing so, it would then diminish Chinese involvement in the region. It would limit Iranian capacity to enhance itself in the region. And there are a lot of characteristics that are very lucrative from President Trump's perspective. So there are different public statements that have not gone um, just by without having to take notice of that, where the Trump administration was a lot more forceful towards Jerusalem with regard to its asks and demands.
Well, even Trump came out and said, that we had a very strong, strong meeting, meeting.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so I mean, it was very clear, even how he came in. I think this was business. We're getting down to brass tacks here. We need to get something
Right.
done here. Bibi understands. And so while there was an ultimatum given to Hamas, I think there was a real strong, strong ultimatum also given to Israel.
Well, you're absolutely right, but we do need to remember that when we're talking about the approach of what the Trump administration currently engages in, it's an America First approach. And when we take that into account, and we're looking at the manner in which the Trump administration engages not only on a regional perspective, but also vis-a-vis Israel, we can see that the president is very keen on advancing what he views as the right discourse for America's benefit. So it also comes at the expense of Israel. It comes at the expense of everyone. And we do need to take that into account. Now, of course, he has his advisors surrounding him that are, each one has its own interpretation of what America First should look like. And they're trying to feed this to the president. But ultimately, the president is the one to decide what is the right discourse and what America First actually means. It does seem that it was business as usual, a lot more than what certain individuals might claim. in the public sphere, talk shows and different commentators, because behind the scenes, ultimately, there is a very clear and coherent geostrategic look or outlook from the Trump administration. The various actors operating in those levels understand what they are, and it's ultimately about what are the priorities, what are the asks. So, okay, Israel would engage on A, but it would ask for B and C to align with its own interests. And thank God that the American and Israeli interests do converge on almost anything. It doesn't mean that they converge on everything, but nonetheless, in contrast to years past, under the current administration, we do see that countries such as Qatar, countries such as the Saudis and uh, the Republic of Turkey are receiving a lot more center stage into the American calculus than what occurred in the past, and much of that has to do with strategic power competition. It has to do with, again, with China. It has to do with the variables of what the United States requires in order to confront that challenge. And as that is ultimately um, within the broader calculus of the Trump administration, Israel does have to take that into account, and the manifestation thereof we could see earlier this week.
Very interesting. Now, as of today, Hamas hasn't given an official response yet. They're actually saying we're having trouble, communicating with one another, especially in light of what happened in Doha when IDF, struck some of the leaders, negotiators there, or attempted to eliminate the negotiators for Hamas. So they're saying maybe we'll get back to you on Wednesday. Based on your experience, I mean, we've been watching this for the last couple of years now. What's the likelihood of Hamas agreeing to the terms as is without coming back and saying, here's what we want in exchange?
Well, I do need to note that Hamas is not one cohesive organization. So there are different branches, and within those various branches, each one adheres to an allegiance, be it to Turkey, to Qatar, to Iran, to Egypt, to Saudi. So you do see that they have the different allegiances also within this terrorist organization. And currently, the dominant one, including its field commander of Gaza City, which is the top basic, basically military brass in Gaza, Izzeldin, he is next to Halil al-Haya, who is believed to be wounded in Doha, Qatar. They both align with the Iranians. Now, the Qatari branch and the Turkish branch will likely say yes, but the Iranian branch may say no. It's too early to tell. We'll have to wait and see how this evolves. But again, I am merely a humble analyst. I cannot predict the future. With that being said, it does seem that Hamas will ultimately say yes, but. And the question is, what is that but?
I agree. That's what I'm wondering too, is, yeah, we'll agree, and then you'll just continue to play this thing out, play it out. We're so close, but we need to work out some other details here before we can really sign off on this. And yet, President Trump gave an ultimatum of 72 hours.
Right.
And so we'll see how that plays out as well. Now,
Well, whatever it is, I will encourage our viewers at home. We need to pray
amen.
not only for guidance of what is happening, but of what may happen, and for wisdom to our leaders to guide them in the right discourse in accordance with God's will, and at the same time also for the protection of the troops and for the hostages right now in the dungeons of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Let us not forget 48 hostages, up to 20 of them believed to be alive, are still in Gaza in the harshest conditions. And we need to really cry to God in all earnestly to see those hostages return to their loved ones And I believe that at that moment, the healing in Israel may start to all the atrocities that were so devastating to the southern communities of Israel and all of Israel on October 7th of 2023. And within that context, to point out that, you know, Israel is right now a country in PTSD. 2 years of war, we still experience near daily red alert sirens, rocket fire, and unmanned aerial vehicles launched from all the way from Yemen in the south and the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Gulf are firing on a near daily basis towards Israel. During the nights, people go into bomb shelters. This is not sustainable, and we need, again, pray for wisdom. We do know that true peace won't occur until the Prince of Peace returns, but nonetheless, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. They shall be called the children of God, but ultimately, the one accommodates the other.
Couldn't agree more. You know, now before this bilateral meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, you had Israel's allies, such as the United Kingdom, you had France, Australia, Portugal, Canada, come out and say we recognize a Palestinian state. And really, during the UN General Assembly, you also had that overwhelming vote. We need to move towards this Palestinian state. Do you believe in some way that this bilateral meeting between Trump and Netanyahu shifted the narrative a bit in Israel's favor? Because now you have, in many ways, I think, Israel coming to the table saying, we're willing to agree to this 20-point plan. We have Arab and Muslim nations now who are agreeing to this 20-point plan. So instead of the narrative being controlled and driven by Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, now you have this pivot more towards Israel's favor because of what they've agreed to and signed off on with regards to Trump's plan. What are your thoughts there? Does it change the dynamic internationally now? And
yeah, you know, on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, no. I think that we need to remember that President Trump is somebody who came to clear the swamp in the United States and Washington. His words. You know, he came to push back on the elites and bring some fresh individuals into the systems. And Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, these corrupt organizations are the swamp of the Palestinian street. So what he's basically saying, I'm bringing new blood into the game. And if the old blood wants to be part of it, you better reform. And reformation means stop paying people to murder non-Muslims, okay? Because it's not only Jews, it's Christians, it's non-Muslims altogether, and anyone who aligns with the fundamental perception of Jews have a right to have a nation state of their own in their ancestral homeland, which is based on the foundations of our faith, the Bible, the Word of God. They're saying, no, we don't believe the Bible is true, so we're not standing for that, and we're going to pay anyone who is fighting against that. That is something that needs to change. And then another aspect to this is looking at the situation and telling yourself there are families, there are Arab families, which I know personally, who don't have food to eat, not because of Israel, because the corrupt Palestinian Authority diverts much of the funds that are delivered by consecutive American administrations, including the European Union and other international bodies, to their own pockets. And whoever is aligned with them and close to them and supports them politically is ultimately the one receiving that capital into their pockets and can share in that abundance. Anyone who is not aligned with them is left out. In 2004, when the last legislative committee was voted upon. So the regular, supposedly, the Bush administration at the time pushed for a democratic process where the neocons wanted to assert democracy on the Palestinian street. Condoleezza Rice was very vigorous in her approach back then. And ultimately, Hamas won, not by a large margin, but it won the election back then. Fatah got roughly 3 to 4% less than them. Hamas won on the ticket of fighting corruption, not on Islamism. But the number that nobody looked at was the 2.41% that Salam Fayan got, who was the individual that went for a ticket of peace and a two-state solution back then. 2.41%, which was the number of people who were willing to support the prospect of peace with Israel. Meaning that there is no truthful or there is no genuine belief that Jews have a right to their ancestral homeland, to have a state of their own in this land, which is the essence of what Zionism means. Mm-hmm. If you're an individual who believes that Jews are allowed to have a nation state in their ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, you're a Zionist. That is the way it is. It's not a bad word which those Islamists and Marxists are pushing forward on a regular basis. It's just not the case, you know? So ultimately, if we fight for the foundation of the Word of God and want to see the creation of a good environment that advances peace and prosperity, true peace and prosperity, into the region and in Israel in particular, but also to the foreigners amongst us, which the Word of God is very explicit on how we should deal with them in the broader context, we should also take into account that the approach should be one of straightforwardness. There are no institutions that are sustainable. They are predominantly reliant on humanitarian aid deliveries, handouts from the international community, billions upon billions. That is not a environment that can sustain society, let alone a state. So anyone pushing for the narrative of a two-state solution is completely detached from reality on the ground. A process in which you want to impose a new reality on the ground just doesn't work. And take into account what is happening. If you look at the map, and I always like to encourage all listeners, viewers, go to the map, figure out where all those countries are, where all those regions are. But if you look at Judea and Samaria, Ramallah is the seat of the so-called Palestinian Authority. The northern parts of Samaria were families, poor families, that did not necessarily align with the Palestinian authorities dominating faction, namely Fatah. What happened? They were shunned, they were pushed aside. Iran came in, started paying them salaries, started giving them weapons, started indoctrinating them in the discourse of armed resistance, supposedly. And ultimately, what happened? We started having waves of terror. So the fact of the matter is, corruption, unless it reforms, will open the door, it will open a vacuum to foreign adversaries to re-enter, not only into the Gaza Strip, but into Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley. So this is a real problem that Israel needs to deal with. Yeah. We can't just shove it underneath the rug.
Exactly. But do you think Trump's 20-point plan really does set the stage, as I'm hearing people talk about right now, really does ultimately set the stage for a Palestinian state?
No.
Why?
Because I think that it sets the stage for a vigorous process that will allow for coexistence, prosperity, and peace, as he put it, quote unquote. He put the elusive word statehood in there. But anyone who knows anything about, diplomacy, that sentence was a prerequisite of the Saudis to join the Abraham Accords. So he was looking at the broad picture here. He wasn't really looking at the specifics vis-a-vis the Palestinians. He is saying, yes, I'm going to have the mechanism to see the rehabilitation of the Gaza Strip, of Judea, Samaria, the Jordan Valley. But I'm not going to be part of resolving this issue. We will facilitate, but you, Israel, and you, Palestinians, figure it out. And as it should. I mean, the United States
That's
is,
been the position of the United States all along.
it's the right position to have. You know, through dialogue, you can resolve. The moment diplomats stop speaking, guns start blazing.
My concern, though, is Trump only has so many more years on his term left. And so what then happens to this type of arrangement after he's gone?
Well, good question. And we'll have to wait and see what type of administration will be the next one. Will it be another Republican administration? Maybe a more conservative in the pure sense of the word conservative? Maybe it will be a libertarian one, which wants to shun away any international involvement, or we'll have a Democrat administration that will alter the policy altogether with the fundamentals still in place. Um, there was a large contrast between Trump 1 and Trump 2 administrations, with the Biden administration in between. And that sharp contrast created some splinters in the discourse of American foreign policy and also the perception of the way America was viewed in the international arena. But time will tell. It's too early. We're how many, 8, 9 months now into the new administration.
Yep.
God willing, they'll be able to do a lot in this timeline, and a lot still can happen. I mean, you know, there's there are a lot of precedents, but not a lot of unprecedented developments, and therefore I am cautiously skeptical about the success rate of what may occur in the Middle East.
One more thing before I let you go. President Trump met with President Erdogan last week, Turkey. Turkey has been very outspoken against Israel, against Netanyahu, one of the strongest critics there in the Middle East, a member of NATO. So you have this tension between Israel, the United States, a NATO partner, Turkey. Turkey has what, I think the 7th largest army in the world. Israel has air superiority there in the Middle East, so Turkey's been wanting F-35s. What are your thoughts? What are your takeaways in regards to that meeting? Because I came away very concerned about what might be inked in terms of a deal and how that might set the stage for a future conflict between Israel and Turkey.
So, first of all, you all the time hear Turkey has the second strongest or second largest army in NATO. That is something that they keep repeating. Turkey's economy is crumbling. Its military is not sustainable. It is in a tough situation to be in. And President Trump's ask during his meeting with President Erdogan was for Turkey to halt all gas and oil imports from Russia.
Mm-hmm.
If Turkey does that, its economy collapses, and its whole economic strategy comes to a fatal end. So there is that issue that they need to deal with on the one hand. because Turkey believes that it should become a transit hub of oil infrastructure from Russia, from the east, from the west, from different directions. And it's very keen on making that happen. Now, the Trump administration in particular, and the United States at large, were very concerned that Turkey would find itself in the arms of China. And Ankara noticed that and started, they started exploiting that to their benefit, with messaging, with narratives, with different activities in the field to try and convince America that, look, we have alternatives. And the United States acted on that. So we are seeing that the United States is engaged with Turkey a lot more. When it comes to the F-35s, I still have a hard time believing that the United States would deliver the F-35s because of Turkey's procurement of the S-400s.
Agreed.
And in the event that the United States does that without foregoing the S-400s by Turkey, the F-35 will pretty much be rendered mute within the context of NATO. So there are a lot of calculations that need to be taken into account. Now, we do know that since 2017 in particular, President Erdogan became increasingly hostile with regard to Israel's right to exist, stating time and again that, Jerusalem is an Ottoman city, and he's, Jerusalem is in his heart. He really believes that should be a Turkish city. The walls of the city today, they were built by Suleiman the Magnificent, of course, 1536. But Erdogan himself, he looks at it from a historic perspective. When in 1514, August 23rd, Selim I launched an attack against the Iranians, pushed back on the Persians back then, Shah Ismail I. It was a resounding victory. Subsequently, 2 years later, once the vacuum of the Persian absence emerged, Selim I pushed southward against the Mamluks and conquered Damascus, initially Aleppo, down to Damascus, very similar to what happened right now in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
Subsequently, Selim I conquered Jerusalem. Now, Erdogan, on a number of occasions, including in 2017, after he won a whole list of executive powers in reform of the Turkish constitution, he traveled to the dome of Selim I, where he proclaimed that he and his faction, the AKP, are the grandchildren of Selim I and the continuers of his endeavors. It was a couple of weeks later when he decided to announce that he views Jerusalem as an Ottoman city. Now, in Israel, they see that, and they're alarmed by this. Now, with the American concerned about Turkey today potentially departing from the West and moving to China, he is exploiting his interests to move southward with the United States via President Trump's ambassador Tom Barrack, trying to establish a foothold in Syria and then expanding Turkey's influence to other regions. Turkey is also playing a constructive role in Russia, meaning in Ukraine versus Russia. It's playing a constructive role from America's perspective in Libya, where it's operating against the Eastern Marshal Haftar, who is backed also by Russia. He's playing a constructive role in America's current strategic perspective in Sudan, and as well as in Somalia, where in Jubaland, the Americans and Turks are aligned. So there is a vacuum of practical accessibility of the Trump administration, or rather of the United States, from a strategic power competition lens in the Black Continent. And therefore, when they're looking at who can help them, Turkey is an ally. It's a prime candidate for that. But the interests do not necessarily converge. So there is a lot of dialogue happening there, and we need to continue to follow this closely. I do
Yes.
agree that this is a point of concern, but for Israel, many elements in the United States institutions also view this as a concern. Europe views this as a concern. And certain actors in the Trump administration are, quite frankly, acting recklessly when it comes to the overtures made, not only vis-a-vis Turkey, but other countries as well, due to a lack of understanding or maybe strategic negligence in essence. Because the national security interests, again, of the United States should be very coherent. If you go for an America First approach, which is not the isolationist type of approach, then you need to think in every theater what is the most important added value to America's national interests, right? And this is how you approach every topic separately from anything. And if you jump in the game with one actor and you say, okay, this is my ask, what is your ask? And he starts giving you all kind of asks from other locations, you need to weigh those options more carefully, because those things that you may give to those actors might impact the way other actors that are more important from a strategic perspective may view it and interpret it in bad light. So
Amen.
I won't go into the whole, complexities beyond that, but
But I do
we need to
appreciate
pray
your
for wisdom.
insights in this. Yes, we need to really pray for wisdom. And so I want to wrap things up here. And I just want to thank you again, Jonathan, and let you know that,
Our pleasure.
and our viewers know, TV7, I'm going to be posting all your links so they can follow you on our podcast here, because you really are a trusted resource in regards to discerning what's going on here with Israel, the Middle East, and in Europe as well. We really need your wisdom, and I'm so grateful that God has raised you up for such a time as this to provide those types of insights. And for those who are watching, so grateful that you joined us as well. And for those who are watching for the very first time, I want to encourage you to learn more about Blessors of Israel by visiting our website. You can do so by going to www.blessors.org. That's Blessors with an ORS.org. There you'll find our vision and our mission statement, why God has raised up Blessors of Israel for such a time as this. I'd like to encourage you also to visit our newsroom. There you'll see curated news concerning Israel and the Middle East, along with original articles with a biblical perspective. If you haven't done so already, I'd like to encourage you to like this podcast, subscribe to this channel. Make sure you tell your friends, people you go to church with, your family members about this, so that we may know how to stand with Israel in the latter days. You can follow us on Facebook, X, and Getter. And we truly appreciate your prayers and your financial partnership as we build this new and important ministry. Remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.